For 3 months, I watched my daughter-in-law, Tasha, move through my house like a stranger learning to walk in someone else's shoes. The way she hesitated before opening cabinets she'd opened 1,000 times before. How she called my grandbaby Sweetie instead of my little star, like she always had. How she forgot that I take my coffee with honey, not sugar, after 5 years of making it perfectly every morning. But the moment that froze my blood was when she looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Mama Clara, where do you keep the good china?" The good china she'd helped me wash by hand every Christmas for the past 5 years. That's when I knew the woman living in my house wasn't my daughter-in-law at all. Thanks for joining me today. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. My name is Clara Jenkins, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I raised 5 children, buried a husband, survived cancer twice, and built a comfortable life in my 3-bedroom house on Maple Street in Atlanta. My world revolved around Sunday dinners, my grandson Christopher's Little League games, and the quiet satisfaction of watching my son, Derek, build his own family with the woman I'd come to love like my own daughter. Tasha had been part of our family for 8 years, married to my Derek for 5 of those. She was the daughter I never had, the one who remembered my birthday without being reminded, who brought me soup when I was sick, and who never forgot to call me Mama Clara instead of Mrs. Jenkins like some daughters-in-law do. She knew that I kept my reading glasses on the kitchen windowsill, that I liked my sweet tea with extra lemon, and that I always saved the last piece of cornbread for whoever wanted it most. But 3 months ago, something changed. It started small. So small, I convinced myself I was imagining things. The way she paused at the top of the stairs like she was remembering which door led to which room. How she opened the refrigerator and stared inside for long moments as if she'd forgotten what she was looking for. When I mentioned it to Derek, he just laughed and said, "Mama, you know how Tasha gets when she's stressed about work? Give her some time." So I did. I gave her time, space, and the benefit of the doubt. But the strange moments kept accumulating like storm clouds gathering on a clear day. There was the morning she made my coffee with sugar instead of honey, then looked genuinely confused when I gently corrected her. "Oh, that's right," she said with a laugh that sounded forced. "I don't know where my head is lately." But Tasha had made my coffee the same way for 5 years. Honey, not sugar. 1 teaspoon stirred clockwise exactly 3 times because I'd told her once that's how my mother used to do it. Then there was the day she asked me where I kept the spare towels that lived in the same linen closet they'd been in since she first started visiting 8 years ago. The same closet where she'd helped me organize my linens just last Christmas, folding each towel with the military precision her grandmother had taught her. I started watching her more carefully after that, the way you might watch a crack in the wall to see if it's spreading, and what I saw made my skin crawl with unease. She held her fork differently now, gripping it like a pencil instead of the proper way her mama had taught her. She'd always been particular about table manners, always corrected little Chris when he forgot to put his napkin in his lap. But now she ate like someone who'd learned manners from watching instead of being taught. Her laugh had changed too. Tasha's real laugh was deep and rich, starting in her belly and bubbling up like music. This new laugh was higher, sharper, like someone trying to imitate a sound they'd heard but couldn't quite reproduce. But the thing that really started to eat at me was how she interacted with Chris. My grandson was 7 years old, sharp as a tack, and absolutely devoted to the woman he called Aunt Tasha. She'd been there when he took his first steps, said his first word, started school. She knew that he was afraid of thunderstorms but loved the sound of rain, that he collected bottle caps, and that his favorite bedtime story was about a little boy who could talk to animals. But this new Tasha called him Sweetie and Honey instead of my little star, the nickname she'd given him when he was barely walking. She didn't remember that he hated having his hair touched, didn't know that he needed his favorite stuffed elephant to fall asleep. When Chris showed her a drawing he'd made at school, she smiled and said, "That's very nice, sweetie," instead of asking him to tell her the story behind it like the real Tasha always did. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was sitting at my kitchen table working on a crossword puzzle and enjoying the autumn sunshine streaming through my windows. Tasha came downstairs dressed for work, her hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless as always. She moved around my kitchen with that same hesitant quality I'd been noticing, opening cabinets like she was looking for something specific, but couldn't remember where to find it. "Mama Clara," she said, turning to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I wanted to set a nice table for Sunday dinner this week. Where do you keep the good china?" The words hit me like ice water. I set down my pencil and stared at her, searching her face for any sign of recognition, any hint that she was joking or testing me. But there was nothing, just polite curiosity and that slightly vacant expression I'd been seeing more and more often. The good china, the set of Lennox dishes that had been my mother's, that I only brought out for special occasions, the same china that Tasha had helped me wash by hand every Christmas for the past 5 years, each piece carefully dried and returned to its proper place in the dining room hutch. The same china she'd admired so many times, running her fingers over the delicate rose pattern and telling me how beautiful it was. "It's in the dining room hutch," I said slowly, watching her face for any flicker of recognition. "Same place it's always been." She nodded and headed toward the dining room, and I followed her, my heart pounding. I watched as she opened the hutch doors and stared at the china like she was seeing it for the first time. No recognition, no familiarity, no memory of all those Christmas mornings when we'd stood together in this exact spot, carefully selecting which pieces to use. That's when I knew. With a certainty that cut through me like a blade, I knew that the woman standing in my dining room, wearing my daughter-in-law's face and living in my son's house, was not Tasha Jenkins. The question that terrified me most wasn't who this woman was. The question that kept me awake that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to every sound in the house, was much more frightening. If this wasn't Tasha, then where was my real daughter-in-law? That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind against the windows made me wonder if I was safe in my own home. By morning, I'd made a decision. If this woman wasn't Tasha, I needed proof, and I needed to be smart about getting it. I started with the photo albums. "Tasha, honey," I called out the next morning as she came down for breakfast. "I was thinking about putting together a scrapbook for Chris's 8th birthday. Would you help me go through some old pictures?" The real Tasha would have lit up at this suggestion. She loved family photos, loved hearing the stories behind each snapshot. But this woman just nodded politely and said, "Of course, Mama Clara. That sounds nice." Nice. Not wonderful, not exciting, not, "Oh, I'd love to." Just nice. I spread the photo albums across my dining room table like I was setting a trap, which I suppose I was. I opened to a page from Chris's 5th birthday party, the one we'd held in my backyard with a superhero theme. In the center photo, Tasha was wearing a bright red cape, her face painted with a mask, laughing as Chris tried to pin the shield on Captain America. "Remember this day?" I asked, pointing to the picture. "You were such a good sport about dressing up." She leaned over the photo, studying it carefully, too carefully. "Oh, yes," she said after a long pause. "That was fun." The real Tasha would have immediately started laughing about how the face paint had taken 3 days to completely wash off, or how she'd tripped over that cape and nearly fell into the cake. She would have pointed to the picture of Derek in his Batman costume and teased about how seriously he'd taken his role as party entertainment. But this woman just looked at the photo like she was trying to memorize details from someone else's life. I turned the page to Christmas photos from 2 years ago. There was Tasha in my kitchen, wearing the red apron with Santa's little helper embroidered on it, flour in her hair and frosting on her cheek as we baked cookies together. "You always were the better baker," I said, watching her face. "Remember how you taught me that trick with the vanilla extract?" She smiled vaguely. "I'm glad I could help." But there had been no trick with vanilla extract. The real Tasha couldn't bake to save her life. Every Christmas, I did all the baking while she did the decorating, and we both joked about how she could burn water. She would have laughed and reminded me that I was the one who did all the teaching in that kitchen. My heart sank deeper with every failed test, but I kept going. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a video from last Easter. "Look at this," I said, pressing play. On the screen, the real Tasha was helping Chris hunt for eggs in my garden, her voice clear and distinctive as she called out, "Hot, hot, hot, you're getting warmer, my little star." The woman sitting next to me watched herself on the screen with the detached interest of someone viewing a stranger's home movies. No smile of recognition, no warm memory of that perfect spring day. Nothing. "Your voice sounds different in recordings," I said casually. "Don't you think?" "Maybe," she replied. "I never like how I sound on video." But her voice did sound different now. Tasha had a slight Southern accent, a musical quality she'd inherited from her grandmother in South Carolina. This woman's voice was flatter, more neutral, like someone who'd learned to speak by careful imitation rather than natural development. I decided to try a different approach. That afternoon, I suggested we clean out Tasha's closet to make room for new winter clothes. I followed her upstairs to the master bedroom, watching as she stood in the doorway of the walk-in closet like she was entering unfamiliar territory. "Where should we start?" she asked. The real Tasha was obsessively organized. Her clothes were arranged by color and season, her shoes lined up by height, her jewelry stored in specific compartments of an elaborate organizer. She would have immediately started with the section of summer dresses that needed to be packed away, or pointed to the shelf of handbags that needed to be sorted through, but this woman just stood there, waiting for direction in what should have been her own space. "Let's start with the jewelry box," I suggested, curious to see how she'd react. She opened the large jewelry box on the dresser, and I watched her face carefully. Inside was Tasha's collection of earrings, necklaces, and bracelets, including the pearl necklace Derek had given her for their first anniversary. The real Tasha had worn those pearls to every important family event for the past 4 years. "These are lovely," the woman said, picking up the pearl necklace like she was seeing it for the first time. "Derek gave you those for your anniversary," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Oh, that's right," she said quickly. "They're some of my favorites." But she was holding them wrong, examining them like a jewelry appraiser rather than a woman touching a treasured gift from her husband. The real Tasha would have immediately put them on and told me the story of how Derek had hidden them in her coffee cup that morning, how she'd almost poured coffee all over them before she noticed the small velvet box. As we worked through the closet, I noticed other things. She didn't know that the blue dress with the tiny flowers was her lucky interview dress, the one she'd worn to get her current job. She couldn't find the scarf I'd given her last Christmas, the one she'd claimed was her new favorite and had worn constantly for weeks. She handled her clothes like someone sorting through donations rather than personal belongings loaded with memories. But the most damning evidence came when I suggested we organize her makeup collection. The real Tasha was allergic to anything with synthetic fragrances and had to use a specific brand of hypoallergenic cosmetics. Her makeup bag was always filled with the same products she'd been using for years. This woman opened the makeup bag and I saw immediately that everything was different. Expensive department store brands, the kind that would have sent the real Tasha to the emergency room with a severe allergic reaction. "When did you switch makeup brands?" I asked, my voice carefully casual. "Oh, I've been wanting to try new things," she said. "My skin seems less sensitive lately." That was when I knew for certain. You don't outgrow severe allergies. You don't forget the layout of your own closet. You don't fail to recognize jewelry your husband gave you or forget the voice you've heard in videos of yourself. This woman looked exactly like my daughter-in-law, moved through her life with careful precision, but she was living someone else's memories, wearing someone else's clothes, sleeping in someone else's bed. As I lay in bed that night, I realized the situation was even more terrifying than I'd initially thought. This wasn't just a case of someone acting strangely. This was deliberate, calculated deception. Someone had replaced my daughter-in-law so skillfully that even her own husband hadn't noticed. But I had noticed. and now I needed to figure out who this woman really was, what she wanted, and most importantly, what had happened to the real Tasha. Because one thing I was certain of, Tasha wouldn't have just disappeared willingly. Someone had made her disappear, and that someone was sleeping in my son's bed, eating at my table, and pretending to be part of my family while I watched helplessly, not knowing if my real daughter-in-law was still alive. The next morning, I knew I couldn't handle this alone, but I also knew I had to be careful about who I trusted. If this woman was dangerous enough to make my daughter-in-law disappear, I couldn't risk tipping her off that I was onto her scheme. I started with Mrs. Margaret Reynolds, my neighbor across the street. Margaret had been living on Maple Street for 30 years, and nothing happened in our neighborhood without her noticing. She was also one of the few people I trusted completely, and she'd known Tasha since Derek first brought her home 8 years ago. That afternoon, I walked across the street with a plate of fresh cookies, my standard excuse for a neighborly visit. "Clara, honey, come on in," Margaret said, opening her door wide. "I was just making some tea. Perfect timing." We settled into her sunny kitchen, and I waited until we both had steaming cups before I broached the subject that was eating me alive. "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," I said, setting down my cup with hands that trembled slightly. "Have you noticed anything different about Tasha lately?" Margaret's expression immediately grew serious. She set down her own cup and leaned forward. "Clara, I was wondering when you were going to ask me that. Yes, I've noticed. Something's been bothering me for weeks, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly." My heart started racing. "Tell me everything." "Well, you know how Tasha always waves when she sees me in the yard? Always stops to chat about the weather or asks about my roses?" Margaret stirred her tea thoughtfully. "About 3 months ago, that stopped. Now she just nods politely, like she barely knows me. And her whole way of walking is different." "Different how?" "The real Tasha has this bouncy step, especially when she's coming home from work. She always looked happy to be coming home to her family. But this woman walks like she's calculating something, like she's thinking about every step." I felt a chill run down my spine. Margaret had noticed the same time frame I had, and she'd picked up on subtle changes I hadn't even consciously registered. "There's something else," Margaret continued, lowering her voice. "Last week, I was getting my mail when she pulled into the driveway. She sat in her car for at least 5 minutes, just staring at the house like she was preparing herself. That's not normal behavior for someone coming home to their own family." I shared my own observations with Margaret, watching her face grow more concerned with each detail I revealed. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Clara, this is going to sound crazy, but what if that's not Tasha at all?" Hearing someone else voice my fears out loud should have been a relief, but instead it made everything more terrifyingly real. "I've been thinking the same thing," I admitted, "but if it's not Tasha, who is it? And where is my real daughter-in-law?" Margaret stood up and walked to her kitchen window, the one that gave her a clear view of my house. "You know, I keep detailed records of everything I see in this neighborhood, old habit from my days as a school principal. Let me get my notebook." She returned with a thick spiral notebook filled with her neat handwriting. I write down anything unusual, maintenance trucks, delivery times, strange cars. It helps me keep track of what's normal and what isn't. She flipped through pages of entries, muttering dates under her breath. "Here," she said, stopping at a page marked with a paper clip. 3.5 months ago, I noted that Tasha seemed to be having car trouble. A tow truck came and took her car away around noon on a Thursday. But then she came home that evening in the same car. "That's strange," I said, leaning closer to read her notes. I thought so too. So I kept watching. The next day, I noticed she was wearing completely different clothes than usual. Instead of her normal work attire, she was in casual clothes, like she wasn't going to her job, and she kept looking around nervously before going into the house. Margaret turned the page. Over the next few days, I documented several things that seemed off. She was getting deliveries of boxes that she carried in herself instead of asking Derek for help like she usually did. She was making phone calls in her car instead of inside the house, and she kept different hours, leaving earlier and coming home later. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and it was more frightening than I'd imagined. Margaret, do you think something happened to the real Tasha that Thursday when her car was towed? I think that's exactly when the switch happened, Margaret said grimly. The question is, who made the switch and why? That evening, I decided to take a different approach. I called Tasha's best friend from work, Monica, using the excuse that I wanted to plan a surprise for Tasha's upcoming birthday. Mrs. Jenkins, that's so sweet of you, Monica said when I explained my fictional plan. But I have to tell you, Tasha's been acting really strange at work lately. We used to have lunch together every Tuesday, but for the past few months, she keeps canceling. And when we do talk, she seems different. Different how, honey? She doesn't remember conversations we had the week before. She forgot that I was going through a divorce, something we talked about for months. And she's been making mistakes on projects she could do in her sleep. Our supervisor has even asked me if everything's okay at home. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. Monica, this might sound like a strange question, but did Tasha ever mention having a sister? A sister? No, never. She always said she was an only child. Why do you ask? Just curious about her family history, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You know how it is when you're planning something special. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. If the real Tasha never mentioned having a sister, how was this imposter pulling off such a convincing performance? Unless I grabbed my laptop and started searching. If this woman wasn't a sister, maybe she was a cousin or a friend who happened to look similar. But as I stared at the screen, a more chilling possibility occurred to me. What if she was an identical twin that the real Tasha didn't know about? I thought about adoption records, separated twins, families torn apart by circumstances. It would explain the physical resemblance while accounting for the lack of shared memories and mannerisms. The next morning, I made a decision that scared me more than anything I'd done in my 72 years. I was going to search through Tasha's personal documents to see if I could find any information about her birth family. But as I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, I heard voices from Derek and Tasha's room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear the woman who wasn't my daughter-in-law talking on the phone in low, urgent tones. Almost ready to make the transfer. Just a few more weeks and I'll have everything we need. Yes, I know it's taking longer than expected, but the old woman is starting to get suspicious. We need to accelerate the timeline. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid she might hear it. Don't worry about Tasha. She's not going anywhere, and even if someone did find her, it wouldn't matter. By then, I'll be long gone with enough money to disappear forever. I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. The real Tasha was alive, but she was being held somewhere against her will. And this imposter wasn't just living in my house for the thrill of deception. She was stealing money, planning to disappear, and she just confirmed my worst fear. She was part of a larger conspiracy. I crept back downstairs on shaking legs, my mind racing. I now knew that Tasha was alive but captive, that money was being stolen, and that time was running out. But I also knew something the imposter didn't know. I was onto her game. The question now wasn't whether I should call the police. The question was whether I could gather enough evidence to save Tasha before this woman disappeared with whatever she was stealing and left my real daughter-in-law to die wherever she was being held. I was no longer just a suspicious grandmother. I was the only person who stood between my family and a dangerous criminal who had fooled everyone except me. It was time to stop watching and start fighting back. That phone conversation haunted me through the night. By morning, I knew I had to dig deeper, but I also knew I was walking into dangerous territory. If this woman was willing to kidnap and imprison my daughter-in-law, what would she do to an elderly woman who discovered her secret? I waited until Derek left for work and the imposter left for her fake job before I made my move. With shaking hands, I climbed the stairs to their bedroom, feeling like a burglar in my own son's house. I started with her purse, searching through the compartments with the thoroughness of someone whose family's life depended on what I might find. Most of it looked normal: makeup, wallet, keys, phone charger. But in a hidden zippered pocket, I found something that made my blood run cold: a driver's license with Tasha's photo, but a different name: Tamara Nicole Washington. My hands trembled as I studied the license. Same face, same height and weight, same eye color. But this license was issued in Nevada, and it showed an address I'd never heard of. More importantly, the middle name was wrong. Tasha's middle name was Michelle, after her grandmother. She told me that story a dozen times. I took photos of the license with my phone, making sure to capture every detail. Then I carefully put it back exactly where I'd found it and continued searching. In the bottom of her jewelry box, underneath the velvet liner, I found a small notebook filled with handwritten notes. My heart nearly stopped as I read the first page. Clara Jenkins, widow, lives alone, substantial savings accounts. Derek Jenkins, trusting, works long hours, rarely checks bank statements. Christopher Brown, grandson, age 7, potential leverage if needed. The notebook contained detailed observations about my family, our routines, our weaknesses. There were notes about my medical appointments, my banking habits, even my friendship with Margaret. This woman had been studying us like a predator studies prey. But the most chilling page was titled Timeline, Week 1-4, Establish credibility, maintain normal routines. Week 5-8, gain access to financial accounts. Week 9-12, begin systematic transfers. Week 13-16, prepare exit strategy. Week 17+, final transfer and disappearance. According to the dates in the margins, we were currently in week 14. I had maybe 2 weeks before she vanished forever, taking whatever money she'd stolen and leaving the real Tasha to die wherever she was being held. I photographed every page of that notebook, my hands shaking so badly I had to take several shots to get clear images. Then I moved to the dresser drawers, searching for more evidence. In the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of sweaters, I found a cell phone I'd never seen before. When I turned it on, it was password protected, but the lock screen showed dozens of missed calls and text messages from someone named Rico. One preview message was visible: "Time is running out. The old lady is getting suspicious. We need to move up the timeline." My chest tightened with fear. They knew I was onto them. I quickly turned off the phone and put it back exactly where I'd found it. I needed to get out of that room before she came home, but I had one more place to search. The closet had yielded clues before, but this time I looked more carefully. Behind her work clothes, I found a small suitcase I'd never seen. Inside were clothes that didn't belong to Tasha: a blonde wig, colored contact lenses, and a passport with yet another name: Sarah Martinez. This woman wasn't just impersonating my daughter-in-law. She was a professional identity thief with multiple fake identities ready to go. But the most damning evidence was at the bottom of the suitcase: bank statements and financial documents that made my heart stop. She had accessed not just Tasha's accounts, but mine as well. Over the past 3 months, small amounts had been transferred from my savings account to various other accounts. Amounts small enough that I wouldn't notice them in my monthly statements, but large enough that when added together, they totaled over $30,000 of my money. She'd also taken out credit cards in Tasha's name and run up massive debt. There were receipts for expensive electronics, jewelry, and cash advances. The real Tasha's credit would be destroyed, assuming she lived long enough for it to matter. I sat on the closet floor, surrounded by evidence of a carefully planned financial crime, and realized the scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't a simple case of mistaken identity or family drama. This was organized fraud, kidnapping, and theft on a massive scale. I quickly photographed everything, then carefully returned each item to its exact position. As I was about to leave the closet, I noticed something else: a small business card tucked into the corner of the suitcase. Martinez Investigations, specializing in asset recovery. The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't random. Someone had hired professionals to study my family, identify our vulnerabilities, and systematically steal our money. But who would want to hurt us? And how had they found someone who looked exactly like Tasha? I hurried downstairs and immediately called Margaret. "I found evidence," I said the moment she answered. "Can you come over? I need your help." Margaret was at my door within minutes. I spread the photos across my kitchen table like pieces of a deadly puzzle. "Dear God, Clara," she breathed as she studied the images. "This is professional-level crime. Look at this notebook. They've been planning this for months, maybe longer." "Margaret, I found a driver's license with the name Tamara Washington. Do you think you could help me research that name online? I'm not very good with computers, but I know you are." For the next 2 hours, Margaret worked on her laptop while I kept watch for the imposter's return. What we discovered was even more frightening than I'd imagined. Tamara Nicole Washington had a criminal record spanning 3 states: identity theft, fraud, assault, and a warrant for her arrest in connection with a missing person case in California. She was part of a criminal organization that specialized in long-term financial fraud, often targeting elderly people with substantial savings. "Clara, look at this," Margaret said, turning her laptop toward me. "She has a twin sister named Tasha Nicole Washington who went missing 4 months ago in California. The police report says she was last seen getting into a car with Tamara." My blood turned to ice. She didn't just find someone who looked like my daughter-in-law. She kidnapped her own twin sister to steal her identity. "And if the pattern from her other crimes holds true," Margaret said grimly, "she's planning to kill Tasha as soon as she's finished stealing everything she can." I looked at the photos scattered across my table, evidence of a crime so calculated and cruel that it took my breath away. Somewhere, my real daughter-in-law was being held prisoner by her own twin sister, who was slowly stealing our family's financial security while we welcomed her into our home. But now I had proof. I had names, evidence, and a timeline. Most importantly, I had confirmation that Tasha was still alive. The question was, how much time did I have before Tamara decided she'd stolen enough and eliminated the only witness who could identify her? Looking at that timeline in her notebook, I realized I might have days, not weeks. And if I was going to save Tasha and protect my family, I needed to stop playing defense and start playing offense. It was time to turn the tables on a woman who thought she was hunting helpless prey, but who was about to discover she'd made the mistake of underestimating a mother's determination to protect her family. Armed with Tamara's real name and criminal history, Margaret and I spent the next day digging deeper into information that could lead us to where the real Tasha was being held. But I knew we were racing against time, and every hour that passed brought us closer to Tamara's final timeline. That evening, I made a decision that terrified me but felt necessary. I was going to follow Tamara. "Clara, that's too dangerous," Margaret protested when I told her my plan. "If she catches you following her, there's no telling what she might do." "Margaret, my daughter-in-law is somewhere out there, probably scared out of her mind, maybe hurt, maybe dying. I can't just sit in my kitchen drinking tea while she suffers. I have to try." The next morning, I positioned myself in Margaret's guest bedroom window with a pair of binoculars she'd borrowed from her late husband's hunting supplies. From there, I could see my entire driveway and part of the street. At 8:47 a.m., Tamara left for what everyone thought was Tasha's job. But instead of turning left toward downtown where Tasha worked, she turned right toward the highway. I quickly grabbed my car keys and followed at a distance, my heart pounding with every mile. She drove for nearly an hour, finally pulling into the parking lot of a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask too many questions. I parked across the street behind a gas station and watched through my rearview mirror. Tamara didn't go to the motel office. Instead, she walked directly to room 127, used a key to open the door, and went inside. She stayed for exactly 23 minutes, then came back out carrying a small bag. But in those 23 minutes, I saw something that confirmed my worst fears. Through the thin curtains of room 127, I caught a glimpse of movement. Someone was in that room, and they weren't moving around freely. The shadow I saw looked like someone sitting in a chair, possibly restrained. When Tamara drove away, I waited another 10 minutes before approaching the motel. My hands were shaking as I walked into the office, where a bored-looking clerk was watching television. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound casual. "I think my niece might be staying here. Room 127? I wanted to surprise her with a visit." The clerk barely looked up. "Lady in 127 paid for a month in advance. Cash. Said she didn't want to be disturbed. Has anyone else been visiting her?" "Yeah, some woman comes by every day or two, brings food and stuff. Told me the lady in the room is sick, recovering from surgery. None of my business what people do as long as they pay rent." I thanked him and walked back to my car, my mind racing. Tasha was in that room, probably tied up, probably given just enough food and water to keep her alive while Tamara finished stealing everything she could. I drove home with a plan forming in my mind, but I knew I couldn't execute it alone. That evening, I called the one person I trusted to help me with something this dangerous. "Margaret, I found her." "Where?" "Sunny Days Motel on Highway 85, room 127. She's being held there, probably restrained. Tamara visits every day or two to bring supplies." "Clara, we have to call the police now. This is kidnapping." "With what proof?" "Everything I have I obtained by searching through Tamara's belongings without permission. And what if the police don't believe us? What if they think I'm just a confused old woman? What if Tamara gets wind of an investigation and kills Tasha before they can find her?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we need to rescue Tasha ourselves and gather concrete evidence at the same time. Evidence that will make it impossible for Tamara to deny what she's done." "How?" "Tomorrow is Saturday. Derek always takes Chris to baseball practice on Saturday mornings, and Tamara usually says she's going shopping or running errands. I'm going to tell her I'm going to spend the day with you, but instead we're going to that motel. Clara, this is incredibly dangerous." "Margaret, that girl has been trapped in a motel room for over 3 months because her own sister is greedy enough to destroy lives for money. I've raised 5 children, buried a husband, and survived cancer twice. I'm not going to let some criminal destroy my family without a fight." The next morning, everything went according to plan. Derek left with Chris for baseball practice, and Tamara announced she was going to the mall to look for new work clothes. I told her I was spending the day with Margaret, which was technically true. Margaret and I waited until we saw Tamara's car pull out of the driveway, then we drove to the motel. This time I'd come prepared with bolt cutters from my garage, and Margaret had brought her cell phone to record everything we found. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right," I told Margaret as we approached room 127. "We need evidence that will stand up in court." I knocked on the door gently. "Tasha? Honey, it's Mama Clara. Are you in there?" The response was immediate and heartbreaking. A muffled voice, weak but unmistakably Tasha's, cried out from inside the room. "Mama Clara? Oh God, Mama Clara, help me! Please help me!" My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the bolt cutters. But adrenaline and determination gave me strength I didn't know I still had. The cheap motel door lock gave way after several attempts. What I saw when I opened that door will haunt me for the rest of my life. Tasha was chained to a chair in the center of the room, her clothes dirty and torn, her face gaunt from months of minimal food. Her wrists were raw from the restraints, and she looked like she'd lost at least 20 pounds. But she was alive, and when she saw me, she started crying with relief. "Mama Clara, I knew you'd figure it out. I knew you'd come to me." Margaret immediately started recording with her phone while I worked to free Tasha from the chains. "Honey, we're going to get you out of here, but I need you to tell me everything while Margaret records it. We need evidence to make sure Tamara never hurts anyone again." Through tears and exhaustion, Tasha told us the whole story. Tamara had contacted her 3 months ago, claiming she was a twin sister given up for adoption who'd finally tracked down her biological family. Tasha, who'd always wondered about her family history, agreed to meet her. "She drugged my coffee at the restaurant," Tasha whispered. "When I woke up, I was chained in this room. She told me she'd been watching our family for months, studying us, learning our routines. She said she was going to take my place until she could steal enough money to disappear forever. Did she tell you what she planned to do with you when she was finished?" Tasha's voice broke. She said I knew too much to ever be set free. She said when she had enough money, she'd make it look like I'd run away, but I'd never make it to wherever she claimed I'd gone. Margaret captured every word, every detail, every piece of evidence we needed to put Tamara away forever. But as I helped Tasha to her feet, supporting her weak and trembling body, I heard the sound that made my blood turn to ice, a car door slamming in the parking lot. I looked through the motel room window and saw Tamara walking toward room 127, her face twisted with rage and determination. In her hand was something that made my heart stop. A gun. We'd found Tasha, but now all three of us were trapped in that motel room with a desperate criminal who had nothing left to lose. "Get behind the bed," I whispered urgently to Margaret and Tasha. "Both of you now." But there was nowhere to run. The motel room had one door, one window, and we could hear Tamara's footsteps getting closer. My mind raced through our options, none of them good. That's when I remembered something that gave me hope. Margaret's phone was still recording. "Margaret," I whispered, "keep that phone recording no matter what happens. Hide it if you have to, but don't stop recording." The footsteps stopped outside our door. I could hear Tamara trying her key, then cursing when she realized the lock had been cut. A moment later, she kicked the door open, and there she stood with a gun pointed directly at me. For a split second, looking at her face twisted with rage, I saw exactly how she'd fooled my family for so long. She was identical to Tasha in every physical way, but the cold calculation in her eyes was something the real Tasha never could have faked. "Well, well," Tamara said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "The nosy old woman finally figured it out. Too bad it's going to be the last thing you ever figure out." "Put the gun down, Tamara," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is over. We have evidence of everything you've done." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Evidence? You mean the evidence you gathered by breaking into my room and stealing my belongings? The evidence you got by breaking into this motel room? Any lawyer could get that thrown out of court in 5 minutes. What about the evidence of you holding your own sister prisoner for 3 months? I gestured toward Tasha, who was barely able to stand. What about the kidnapping, the identity theft, the financial fraud? What kidnapping? Tamara's smile was chilling. Tasha came with me willingly. She wanted to get to know her long-lost twin sister. As for the rest, it'll be my word against hers, and dead people don't make very good witnesses. That's when I realized her plan. She was going to kill all three of us and make it look like a robbery gone wrong, or a family dispute that turned violent. With us dead, there would be no one left to contradict whatever story she decided to tell. But Tamara had made one crucial mistake. She was so focused on threatening us that she hadn't noticed Margaret slowly moving her phone into a better position to capture everything being said. "You won't get away with this," Tasha said, her voice weak but defiant. "People will ask questions. Derek will know something's wrong." "Derek?" Tamara laughed again. "Your precious husband didn't even notice I'd replaced you for 3 months. He's so busy with work and that kid, he barely pays attention to what's happening in his own house. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, I'll be in another country with a new identity and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life." "How much did you steal?" I asked, partly to keep her talking, and partly because I needed to know the full extent of the damage. "From your accounts alone? About $45,000 so far. Add in the credit cards, Tasha's savings, and a few other sources, and I'm looking at close to $100,000 total. Not bad for 3 months' work." She was confessing to everything, and Margaret's phone was capturing every word. "Why?" Tasha asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do this to me? I would have helped you if you just asked. When you told me you were my twin sister, I was so happy to find family." "Because taking it is easier than asking for it," Tamara replied coldly, "and because idiots like you and your precious family make it so easy. You welcomed me into your home, gave me access to your entire life, and never questioned a thing. You deserve to be robbed." "What about our parents?" Tasha whispered. "What happened to them?" Tamara's expression darkened. "What parents? We were dumped at separate foster homes when we were babies. I spent my childhood being passed around between families who didn't want me, while you got adopted by some loving couple who gave you everything. You had the life I should have had. So you decided to take it? I decided to take everything. Your life, your family, your money, your identity, everything that should have been mine. I watched the hatred in Tamara's eyes and realized that this wasn't just about money. This was about a lifetime of resentment and jealousy that had twisted her into something monstrous. But now you three know too much, Tamara continued, raising the gun, and I can't have loose ends. That's when I played the card I'd been holding back. Before you do anything stupid, I said calmly, you should know that Margaret and I didn't come here alone. Tamara's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I mean, we told someone else where we were going and what we suspected. If we don't check in within the next hour, they're calling the police. It was a complete lie, but Tamara didn't know that. You're bluffing. Am I? Ask yourself this. Do you really think two women in their 70s would attempt a rescue mission without backup? We may be old, but we're not stupid. I could see doubt creeping into Tamara's expression. She was trying to calculate whether she had time to kill us and escape before our fictional backup arrived. Even if that's true, she said finally, it doesn't change anything. You're still not leaving this room alive. But her hesitation had given me the opportunity I needed. While she was distracted by thoughts of potential witnesses, I'd been slowly moving closer to the lamp on the bedside table. You know what your real mistake was, Tamara? I said, taking another small step closer to the lamp. What? You underestimated a mother's love for her family. I grabbed the heavy ceramic lamp and swung it at Tamara's gun hand with every ounce of strength I had. The gun went flying across the room as she screamed in pain and rage. Margaret was already moving, diving for the gun while Tamara clutched her injured wrist. Tasha, despite her weakened condition, managed to grab the phone and dial 911. This is 911, what's your emergency? This is Tasha Jenkins, she said, her voice getting stronger with every word. I'm at the Sunny Days Motel, room 127. I've been kidnapped and held here for 3 months by my twin sister. We need police and an ambulance immediately. Tamara made one last desperate lunge toward Margaret and the gun, but I was ready for her. 72 years old or not, I wasn't about to let this woman hurt my family anymore. I tackled her to the ground with a force that surprised both of us, and we struggled on the motel room floor until the sirens arrived. When the police burst through the door, they found Tamara pinned under me, Margaret holding the gun safely out of reach, and Tasha giving them a detailed account of everything that had happened. But most importantly, they found Margaret's phone still recording, containing a full confession of kidnapping, identity theft, and attempted murder. For the first time in 3 months, I felt like I could breathe again. My real daughter-in-law was safe. The imposter was caught, and we had enough evidence to make sure Tamara would never hurt anyone again. Justice was finally within reach. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft sound of Tasha's breathing. She'd been sleeping for most of the day, her body finally allowing itself to rest after 3 months of captivity and terror. I sat in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand and watching the rise and fall of her chest, still hardly believing she was safe. Dr. Jennifer Davis had assured us that despite her ordeal, Tasha would make a full physical recovery. The emotional healing would take longer, but she was strong, and she had family who loved her. Derek hadn't left her side since the police called him at the baseball field. When he first saw her in that hospital bed, pale and weak but alive, he'd broken down completely. The guilt of not realizing his wife had been replaced was eating him alive. How could I not have known? He kept asking. How could I live with someone for 3 months and not realize she wasn't my wife? Because you trusted, I told him, because you loved your wife and you had no reason to suspect that someone would be evil enough to kidnap her and steal her life. You're a good man, Derek, and good people don't expect that level of evil from others. Detective Michael Garcia had been thorough in his investigation. With Margaret's recording, the evidence we'd gathered from Tamara's belongings, and Tasha's testimony, they had built an airtight case against not just Tamara, but the entire criminal network she'd been working with. She's going away for a very long time, Detective Garcia told us during one of his visits to the hospital. Identity theft, kidnapping, fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. We're looking at 25 to life, possibly more when we factor in her previous convictions in other states. The money recovery was going better than expected. Because we'd acted quickly and provided detailed evidence of the fraudulent transactions, the banks were cooperating fully in recovering the stolen funds. Most of my money had been returned, and Tasha's credit was being restored. But perhaps the most satisfying part of the whole ordeal came 3 days after Tamara's arrest. When Detective Garcia paid us another visit at the hospital. "I thought you'd want to know," he said with a smile. "We got Rico." "Rico?" I asked. "Tamara's partner, the one who was coordinating the whole operation. Your recording captured enough information for us to track him down. Turns out he was running similar scams in 4 different states, all targeting elderly people with substantial savings." He showed us a photograph of a man in handcuffs being led to a police car. Between Tamara's confession and Rico's arrest, we've been able to help recover stolen money for at least a dozen other families. Your courage in following Tamara and recording that confession saved a lot of people from losing their life savings. That made everything we'd been through feel worthwhile. We hadn't just saved our own family, we'd helped protect other families from the same devastating crime. Chris had been the hardest to explain the situation to. How do you tell a 7-year-old that the woman he thought was his aunt had actually been a criminal impersonating his real aunt? Dr. Davis recommended a child psychologist who specialized in helping children process traumatic events. The important thing, the psychologist told us, is that Chris sees his real aunt recovering and knows that the people who love him are safe. Children are remarkably resilient when they feel secure. Chris's first visit to see Tasha in the hospital was emotional for all of us. He approached her bed cautiously, studying her face carefully. "Aunt Tasha," he said quietly, "is it really you this time?" Tasha started crying, but she managed to smile through her tears. "It's really me, little star. It's really me." When Chris heard his special nickname, the one only the real Tasha had ever used, he climbed carefully onto the hospital bed and hugged her as gently as his 7-year-old arms could manage. "I missed you," he whispered. "The other lady was mean. She didn't know about my bottle cap collection or my elephant." "I missed you too, baby," Tasha whispered back. "But I'm here now, and I'm never going away again." 2 weeks later, Tasha was released from the hospital. We'd all agreed that she and Derek would stay with me for a while, just until she felt strong enough to be in their own house again. The idea of going back to the place where Tamara had lived, slept, and planned her crimes was understandably difficult for Tasha to face. That first Sunday dinner back together was different from any meal we'd ever shared. We were all more grateful, more aware of how precious our time together really was. Even the simple act of passing dishes around the table felt like a celebration. "Mama Clara," Tasha said as we were finishing dessert, "I need to thank you for never giving up on me. Even when everyone else was fooled, you knew something was wrong." "A mother knows," I said simply. "Family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about really seeing each other, really knowing each other. And I knew that woman wasn't my daughter-in-law from the moment she asked about the china." Margaret joined us for that dinner, and we toasted to friendship, family, and the power of women who refuse to be victims. The investigation had revealed that Tamara and Rico had been studying our family for over 6 months before they made their move. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed that an elderly woman living alone would be an easy target, someone who could be fooled and manipulated without consequence. They'd never considered that this elderly woman had raised 5 children, survived cancer, and had the fierce determination of someone who'd fought for everything she had in life. A month later, we attended Tamara's sentencing hearing. The judge listened to victim impact, statements from our family and from several other families whose lives had been devastated by similar crimes. Ms. Washington, the judge said as he prepared to announce the sentence, you have shown a complete disregard for the sanctity of family bonds and the security that people should feel in their own homes. Your crimes were calculated, cruel, and devastating to multiple families. He sentenced her to 35 years in prison without possibility of parole for 25 years. Rico received a similar sentence. Both would likely spend the rest of their lives behind bars. As we left the courthouse that day, Tasha took my arm and squeezed it gently. "It's finally over," she said. "No, honey," I replied, looking at my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandson walking together toward our car. "It's finally beginning again." That evening, as I sat in my kitchen drinking tea and watching my family through the window as they played in the backyard, I reflected on everything we'd been through. The fear, the confusion, the danger, and ultimately, the triumph. I'd learned that evil can wear familiar faces and live in our own homes, but I'd also learned that love, intuition, and determination are more powerful than any criminal scheme. Most importantly, I'd learned that family isn't something that can be stolen or replaced, no matter how perfect the imitation might seem. Real family is built on years of shared memories, inside jokes, small gestures of love, and the deep knowledge that comes from truly seeing and being seen by the people we love, and that no criminal could ever replicate. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my garden on a beautiful spring morning, watching Chris chase butterflies while Tasha and Derek work together to plant new flowers. The physical scars from Tasha's ordeal have healed, and while I know the emotional ones will take longer, every day she seems more like herself again. The house feels different now. Not just because we're all more aware of how precious our safety and security really are, but because we've been through something together that has made our bonds stronger than ever. We don't take each other for granted anymore. We notice the small things, the daily kindnesses, the familiar gestures that make us family. Last week, Tasha made my coffee with honey, stirred clockwise 3 times, just the way I like it. When she handed me the cup, our eyes met and we both smiled. Such a simple thing, but it represented everything that Tamara could never understand or replicate. The real intimacy of family isn't in the big gestures. It's in knowing exactly how someone takes their coffee after 5 years of making it with love. Detective Garcia stops by occasionally to update us on the case and the ongoing investigation into the criminal network. Tamara and Rico's arrests led to the discovery of at least 20 other families who had been targeted by similar schemes. The FBI has opened a task force dedicated to investigating this type of organized fraud against elderly victims. Your family's courage to fight back probably saved dozens of other families from going through what you went through, Detective Garcia told us during his last visit. That recording Margaret made is being used to train law enforcement officers across the country about how these crimes work. Margaret has become something of a local celebrity for her role in the investigation. The Neighborhood Watch Group asked her to give a presentation about recognizing suspicious behavior, and she's been invited to speak at senior centers about protecting yourself from fraud. She jokes that at 74, she's finally found her calling as a detective. The legal proceedings are finally winding down. Tamara's appeals have all been denied, and she's been transferred to a maximum security prison in another state where she'll spend the next 25 years. Rico is serving his sentence in federal prison and will likely never be released. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome is what happened to the money they thought they'd successfully stolen. Between the evidence we gathered and the cooperation of multiple law enforcement agencies, virtually every penny was recovered and returned to the families they'd victimized. Tamara's dream of disappearing to another country with our money became her nightmare of spending decades behind bars with nothing to show for her crimes except the satisfaction of knowing that justice was served. The trauma counselor we've all been seeing says that Tasha is making remarkable progress. The nightmares have become less frequent, and she's starting to talk about going back to work part-time. More importantly, she's regaining her sense of security and trust. The thing that bothers me most, she told me recently, isn't what Tamara did to me physically. It's that she stole months of my life with Chris and Derek, months of bedtime stories I didn't get to read, conversations I didn't get to have, moments I can never get back. But honey, I reminded her, you're here now, and every day going forward is a day she can't touch. Chris has adjusted better than any of us expected. Children are resilient, and the fact that he was young enough to accept that the bad lady who looked like Aunt Tasha was gone and his real aunt was back seemed to be enough for him to move forward. His biggest concern now is making sure that Tasha knows all the things that happened while she was gone, as if he's personally responsible for filling in the gaps in her memory. Aunt Tasha, he said to her just yesterday, did I tell you that I lost my first tooth while you were gone? And I learned to ride my bike without training wheels? And Mrs. Reynolds taught me how to make cookies? Derek has struggled the most with guilt, but he's working through it with the help of counseling and the patient support of his wife. He's also become fiercely protective of our family's privacy and security in ways that sometimes worry me, but that I understand. I failed to protect my wife once, he told me. I won't let it happen again. You didn't fail, I told him. You trusted, which is what people in love do. The failure was Tamara's, not yours. As for me, this experience has taught me things about myself that I never knew. At 72, I discovered that I'm braver than I thought, more determined than I knew, and absolutely unwilling to let anyone hurt my family without a fight. I also learned that intuition is real, that the feeling that something is wrong should never be ignored, and that sometimes the most dangerous threats come disguised as the people we love most. But mostly, I learned that real love, real family, real connections between people can't be faked, no matter how skilled the imposter or how perfect the performance. The heart knows the difference between authentic love and clever imitation. Today, as I watch my real daughter-in-law laugh at something Chris is saying, as I see the genuine joy on her face and the natural way she moves through our family dynamics, I'm grateful for every small detail that told me she had been replaced. The hesitation before opening familiar cabinets, the wrong coffee preparation, the forgotten nicknames, all of those seemingly minor inconsistencies were my heart's way of telling me that something precious had been stolen from us. Thank you so much for staying until the end of my story. If you enjoyed this journey of family, betrayal, and justice, please hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you thought about the story. Your support means everything to me, and I love hearing from all of you about how these stories touch your lives. Have you ever had a feeling that something was wrong with someone you love? Have you ever trusted your instincts even when everyone else thought you were imagining things? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember, family isn't just about sharing blood or living under the same roof. It's about really seeing each other, really knowing each other, and being willing to fight for the people you love when they can't fight for themselves. Until next time, trust your heart, protect your family, and never underestimate the power of a mother's love.